Brad Bird is returning to animation and he's teaming up with an unlikely source and getting it distributed through Netflix. Welcome back to my channel where we talk news, editorials, kind of like today, as well as upcoming animated movie reviews on the weekends. And as far as some news coming out today, it's been a little bit slow, but I feel like since Comic-Con has come out, there's been a lot of news coming out of there that maybe I'd like to reflect on, and one of them is this story in regards to animation director, live action director Brad Bird tackling a movie project that he's been in development for 30 years, wanted it to get made through Turner Classics at the time they were making, then becoming Warner Brothers Animation, then making Iron Giant, still having this project in the background. Now it's finally seeing the light of day. We'll go ahead and talk about the story that I have here, just to maybe explore it a little bit further, and I'll give my thoughts on it over. Since his directorial debut, The Iron Giant, in 1999, Brad Bird has been challenging audiences' expectations of what animated films can do and who they can be for. There's a big chunk of people who don't watch animation, Bird tells to dumb. That's a group of anxious to persuade because it's an amazing art form that limited people's minds. That's kind of typical of Bird to say. For years he's been advocating for the fact that animation is a medium, not a genre. Has been one of those guys who, he's won Academy Awards for it. He's been going out saying all these great things. Even Guillermo del Toro, when making Pinocchio, had reflected that quote he said when winning his Academy Award for Pinocchio. Coincidentally, another film that was backed by Netflix, which we will talk about a little bit later, but let's go back to the article. Bird's latest, Ray Gunn, which will beam on Netflix December 18th, is perhaps the two-time Academy Award-winning director's boldest play. As blasting through the limitations Ray Gunn has percolating in the director's mind for more than 30 years, since even before The Iron Giant, and in those decades, despite the many transformations in animation technology and the film industry at large, the fundamental concept has never changed. It was always meant to be a blend of sci-fi and classic detective stories from the 40s, says Bird. The elevator pitch I came up with is Maltese Falcon meets Buck Rogers. Now, granted, I am kind of excited about this because it's good to see an original animated film come out into theaters. As far as challenging bigger studios like Pixar or Disney, I don't know if this is necessarily going to be a challenge per se, but I would say in the last couple of years, we have had DreamWorks and Pixar and Disney, not making consistent hits as it was back in the day, but now it's streaming. We have, lesser known studios getting their movies made and having filmmakers reach out to them and make passion projects that they probably would not have been able to do with traditional studios. So let's talk a little bit more about this film. In Metropia, a giant city in an alternate future, as seen from 1939, Private Eye Raymond Gunn is drawn into a case involving aliens, murder, and multimedia star named Venus Nova, Scarlett Johansson. In visualizing Metropia, Bird tapped into Art Deco-inspired pre-World War II visions of the future, which I think is kind of cool because earlier on he worked with Bruce Timm at one point to make a movie based on The Spirit, and ironically enough, this led to Bruce Timm going on to Warner Brothers Animation and making the Batman animated series, whereas Brad Bird still hanging out in television animation, working in The Simpsons, and then eventually working into feature films, also keeping a Warner Brothers connection there, and then eventually going on to Pixar. Kind of interesting that maybe this is the film that was coming out before or after The Spirit didn't get made, and that he wanted to go about making this type of film. Now, what surprises me the most is not only is Sam Rockwell going to be performing as the main character, who I think is a fantastic voice actor and just a fantastic actor in his own right. You have Scarlett Johansson, who, outside of Mindy in the SpongeBob movie, has actually been one of the biggest advocates for animation in a lot of ways. I'm going to go as far as to say that there's another piece of this that a lot of people aren't mentioning. Two things, in fact. This article does mention that the sidekick character is being voiced by Tom Waits. I think I'm saying that right. which is such an interesting choice. For one, he has done Ballad of Buster Scruggs, and he had a very interesting segment in that movie. In a lot of ways, I would love to see Tom Waits in more stuff. It's such a inspired choice to have him in a movie, an animated movie, as a talking alien side character. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, in a lot of ways, I'm sure Brad Bird is having a ball with this. But the other thing that I think a lot of people are missing out on, and if you go to other articles, and you also go to IMDb, you will notice that this is being produced, the animation itself is being produced by Skydance, getting distributed by Netflix. And no one other than John Lasseter is producing this film. And there's even going to be a side character voiced by John Ratzenberg. So when they're saying that, they're challenging Pixar, I don't think that's necessarily a true statement, since you got a lot of the OG Pixar films, and in a lot of ways, the side of Pixar that a lot of people don't want to go into. If you want to know a little bit about John Lasseter as far as why he is not with Pixar Animation, I will just encourage you to Google it. That is a whole video in itself, but that doesn't give me a warm, cuddly feeling inside, outside of the fact that once Brad Bird is making movies, and he's doing it with Netflix, which, coming back to what I was saying before, this isn't unknown for Netflix to bank on what a lot of creators want to do. And in a lot of ways, that's very exciting, but in a lot of ways, it's not really reassuring. Let's take a look at their track record on films that have been creator-driven inspirations where, no other studio wanted to bank on it. Martin Scorsese's The Irishman. Not a bad film, but definitely criticized for its use of de-aging technology. Then you also have Francis Ford Coppola's Metropolis, or Megalopolis, or whatever it's called. That film has been critically panned throughout the board, but this is that movie he's always wanted to make. And then we got some exceptions like, as I mentioned before, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. But this is where I would argue that there's a reason why studios don't want to bank on giving carte blanche to a lot of creators, because once you're doing that, you don't know where it's going to go. You're trusting your hands in an auteur to make this movie, and whether or not that's going to turn out great or it's going to turn out bad, that's on you, because you gave them the permissions to do that. Whereas me personally, I always believe in a combination of, the producers are out there, they're making a product. Their job is to make a product, something that people are going to come back to. They're investing money into doing this, whereas the director is the guy creating it. Synergy. You got to have a little bit of both going into the mix so that you get a good product. Disney has been mastering that for many years, and then they have their ups and then they have their downs, whereas there's too much producing going on and corporate oversight, and then there's too much creativity, which then results in, just not enough balance. And that's kind of the point where I feel like they're at right now, where there's just so much of a shift towards corporate oversight. And in a lot of ways, kind of happening with Pixar. Pixar's in a weird state. I mean, I recently saw Hoppers, and I thought that was a very inspired film. And if anything, I would love if they would go into that direction, but they're going in such a creative direction that I don't know if they still know what their audience is. And this is the worry that I have about Netflix banking on Ray Gunn, which is, an original movie. Tell me about this 10 years ago. In fact, there's a little funny detail. When you go on IMDb, you're going to see referenced in Animat's Cartoon Corner, Chippendale's Cartoon Palooza. As it turns out, that was the podcast that I was on talking about this film in 2022, which is a little funny detail that here we are talking about it later. Full circle. There's something to be said here that, we are getting more original films. Whether or not that's going to be perceived as well or not perceived as well, it really depends on what people are watching. And streaming is at that point where this is the consumer-friendly choice, I guess. But in a lot of ways, it's still also showing that movies in theaters are doing well. When you look at like The Odyssey and you look at Spider-Man bringing in billions of dollars in theaters, so people are not stopping to go to the theaters. I just think we're at a point where going to a theater is kind of like going to a concert, like a lesser form of going to a concert. and having something on streaming is like what going to the theaters is. It's just an interesting dichotomy. I really don't have any clear answers as to far as what's going to happen, but am I excited for this movie? Absolutely. Do I have some concerns? Yeah, with John Lasseter producing this film, doesn't give me, warm, cuddly feelings. But at the same time, too, this is Brad Bird giving carte blanche, so maybe it's going to go well, maybe it's not. Those are just my general thoughts. Comment below, let me know what you think. And as always, if you like this content, hit the subscribe button, click the bell so you get the notifications so that you see this video coming up. And thanks for watching. Take care, everybody.